the seamstress's shoes and the silver needle. On the coast where the wind arrived, weary from crossing the western sea, there stood a village of grey stone and dark roofs that seemed to be asleep even in daylight. The houses huddled close together like sheep on a cold hillside, and between them ran narrow paths where sometimes the smell of peat drifted down, sometimes the scent of oat bread, sometimes the salt tang that clung to the lips. Not far away, behind a moss-covered wall in a small garden where cabbages and fragrant herbs grew, lived a seamstress named Aithne. Her house was small, though well cared for. It had a blue door worn by rain, a low window where a striped cat liked to perch when it wanted to watch the mist, and a chimney that never seemed to go fully cold. Inside there was always warmth. Not a heavy or stifling warmth, but that gentle kind that lingers in wool and hands. The sort of warmth that makes a cup of tea feel deeper and turns the afternoon kinder. Aithne worked by the window, her head slightly inclined, her needles arranged in a round pincushion, her scissors gleaming like a river fish, and threads falling in soft cascades of color. We sew many things over the course of a life, she sometimes thought. Sleeves, hems, blankets for children, shrouds for the old, wedding dresses, little pouches for seeds, curtains that soften the light of April, and yet we never truly finish learning what binds one fabric to another. She was not a woman who said such things aloud. She thought them slowly, passing thread through cloth while listening to the day breathe on the other side of the glass. Aithne was known for the steadiness of her hand. She was not the fastest woman in the village, nor the cheapest, but her stitches lasted, cuffs mended by her endured winters. The embroidery she made for christening handkerchiefs never frayed even after changing hands more than once. And the old women said there was a special peace in the clothing that left her hands, as if the seams themselves knew how to rest. She had lived alone for years. Her mother had died during an autumn of long rains, and her father much earlier, when she was still a girl who sewed crooked because she was always in a hurry to finish. She had never married. There had been a miller who loved her, a young fisherman who brought her white shells, and a passing schoolmaster who recited verses to her at a summer fair. But life, with its quiet way of bending roads, had left her in that house with her threads, her table, her garden, and the sea in the distance. She did not feel unhappy. Sometimes, when night fell and the candle flame moved on its own and the house seemed to remember its silence, she felt a small hollow ache. But she had learned not to fear that sort of emptiness. She filled it with work, with heather infusions, with songs barely hummed, and with the brush of fabric beneath her fingers. Each season had its own music, and Aithne knew how to hear it. Summer smelled of drying linen, autumn of damp wool, winter of old leather and wax, spring of soap, fine rain and freshly turned earth. Everything would have gone on that way, with the simple calm of repeated things, if not for the morning she found the shoes. It had rained during the night. The rain had not struck the glass violently, but had fallen gently, almost thoughtfully, as if it were stitching a transparent gauze over the village. Aithne opened the door at first light to empty the water from her bucket and look at the sky. That was when she saw them. A pair of shoes, small and delicate, rested on the smooth stone of the threshold. They were made of dark leather, though not an ordinary dark. They had the deep sheen of wet bark that nearly black-brown old tree trunks keep in the forest. The toes were narrow and soft, without stiffness. The edges were trimmed with silver thread, so subtle it could only be seen clearly when the light struck it sideways. The soles looked made to leave no sound upon the earth, and on the inside, just where a foot would rest, there was a faint design, 3 interwoven spirals. Aithne looked to one side of the path, then the other. No one was there. Only the song of a blackbird, a thin curl of smoke rising from the neighboring house, and the clean air that comes after rain. She crouched carefully and took the shoes in her hands. They were light, too light, as if the leather remembered leaves more than hide. She examined the inside, searching for a mark, a name, some sign from the village cobbler or from a wealthy household. Nothing. Not a single imperfection. Not a scratch. Not the rough smell of workshops. Instead, they smelled of newly cut hay, green apples, and a flower she could not name, though it reminded her of a very old dream. She thought someone must have left them by mistake. Perhaps a prank, perhaps a confused delivery. She placed them on the table by the window and went on with her tasks, though she kept glancing at them now and then. Mid-morning, Muireann the baker stopped by to collect an apron Aithne had taken in at the waist. "Have you seen this?" the seamstress asked, showing her the shoes. The baker frowned. She was a large woman with cheerful hands, always dusted with flour. "They're lovely. Too lovely to be from here. Whose are they?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." Muireann sniffed them, as if bread had also taught her to understand the world by scent. "They don't smell like glue or a workshop. They smell..." She fell silent. "They smell strange." "They don't seem strange to me." "That is exactly what's strange," said Muireann, and crossed herself the way people in the village did, though in those lands older gestures still survived beneath what the church had never fully managed to erase. Aithne laughed a little and thought no more of it. Until the next morning, because the next morning, when she opened the door, the first shoes were no longer on the table, and on the threshold sat another pair. These were a muted green, like grass under frost, higher at the ankle, laced with the finest cords braided in pale gold, also perfect, also light, also silent to the touch. Aithne set the bucket down without realizing it. She stepped back inside and looked at the table. Empty. She looked outside again. The new pair waited with a strange patience, as if it had always known it would be collected. This time she did not touch them at once. She watched the path, the wall, the cabbages in the garden, the well, the mist beginning to lift. Nothing moved. She heard no footsteps, no hidden laughter, no wheels, only the sea far away. That morning was less peaceful. She asked two neighbors. She went as far as the square under the excuse of buying salt. She watched the children, who always know more than adults imagine. No one knew anything. No one had left new shoes at her door. No one had seen anyone. By afternoon, while she was mending a blue cloak lined with fur, Aithne realized she was listening to the house with a new kind of attention. The wood creaked. Water simmered softly. The cat washed one paw. And behind all that, far behind it, there was a feeling that was neither sound nor thought. It was as if something were waiting politely for her to understand. That night she left the candle burning longer than usual. Not from fear, but from curiosity. Still, sleep overcame her. And at the next dawn, there was another pair of shoes. That was how it began. Each morning a new pair appeared, never like the one before. One day they were soft and hazel-colored with tiny beads sewn into the heel. Another day black as crow feathers beneath the moon, with a slim buckle that looked made of hardened dew. Another reddish leather embroidered with copper thread. Some were small, others even smaller. None seemed made for human feet accustomed to mud and the weight of the road. In all of them there was an ancient grace, a lightness that made them seem born of music rather than hand. And each morning the previous day's pair vanished. They left no note, no footprints, only the shoes. Aithne stopped telling everyone about them because she did not like people's reactions. Some smiled in gentle mockery, others grew tense. Old Domhnall, who had seen more winters than anyone, took her aside after Mass and spoke very softly. "Do not accept gifts from the hollow hills." "I did not ask for them," she replied. "That rarely matters." "Do you think they are from the Sida?" Domhnall took his time answering. He looked first at the sky, then at the bell tower, then at the edge of the distant woods. There are things that should not be named too lightly. Aithne, who was not reckless, felt a small shiver. She knew the stories, as everyone in those lands did. Tales of music heard among green mounds, of feasts that lasted a night and stole 7 years, of children changed, of lovers who returned with their hands full of silver and their hearts emptied out, of white horses running over foam without leaving a mark. To the village, the sea, they were never a gentle fantasy, but an ancient nearness, as beautiful as it was dangerous. They were not denied, they were avoided. That afternoon, she decided not to collect the shoes from the threshold. She left them there on the stone. She prepared supper, swept the floor, tidied her threads. The cat went out and came back with damp paws. Night fell. She looked out through the window. The shoes were still there, barely gleaming beneath the new moon. She went to bed, determined not to yield. But at dawn, the doorway was empty, and on her work table, right beside the pincushion, rested a single silver needle. Not a needle plated in silver or ornamented with it, but real silver, fine, flexible, and firm all at once. It had a tiny, perfect eye. The metal did not shine like jewelry, but like the surface of a lake in shadow. Beneath the needle was a strip of the whitest linen, and on the linen, embroidered in grey thread with letters so small Aithne had to lift the cloth to the light, was a single sentence. 1 stitch only for the calm of the world. She read it twice, then a third time. The room seemed to grow utterly still. There was no one beside her, no wind at the window, no footsteps overhead, and yet the whole house seemed to be listening. Aithne ran her thumb along the edge of the linen. It was not rough. It was soft as the inside of a flower. She turned it over, searching for a signature. Another sign, anything more. Nothing. 1 stitch only for the calm of the world. She did not know whether to laugh, cross herself, or throw the needle into the well. She sat down slowly. All her life she had sewn for money, for need, from habit, and also from love of the craft. She had sewn to keep bodies warm, to repair wear and tear, and to mark important days, but this was different. It was not a commission, it was not a favor, it was not even a threat. It sounded more like a request spoken by someone both very far away and very near. She took up the day's sewing, a child's vest that needed a seam reinforced under the arm. Almost without thinking, she threaded the silver needle with blue thread. She hesitated for a moment. Then she made a single stitch. Only one. The motion was simple. In, out, tighten without pulling hard. Nothing extraordinary. And yet when she drew the thread through and cut the excess, Aithne felt such a sudden, lucid peace that she had to close her eyes. It was no faintness, no dizziness. It was as if somewhere far away, a door that had been creaking had stopped creaking, as if a crooked plate had righted itself, as if an argument only half born had gone back to sleep before it could take shape. She opened her eyes. The room was the same. The kettle still sat over the fire. The cat still slept on the chair. But the air held a new serenity, a rounded stillness. Aithne set the needle down on the table very carefully. She told no one. The next morning there was another pair of shoes, and beneath them another strip of linen with the same phrase, 1 stitch only for the calm of the world. The days began to arrange themselves around that small mystery with the ease of water finding its channel among stones. Aithne rose at dawn, opened the door, and found the new pair of shoes waiting on the threshold. She took them in hand, without haste. Sometimes she lingered over them for a while, letting the day's first light draw out the subtleties of the leather and thread. Then she went inside, set them on the table, and read the brief request waiting beside the silver needle. After that, before beginning her orders or in the middle of them, she made 1 single stitch. Only one, not 2, not half of another. The first week she obeyed out of curiosity, the second out of habit, the third because she began to notice things. They were not loud wonders. No one in the village fell to their knees proclaiming miracles. The sky did not open. No spring burst from the ground. What changed was gentler than that. So gentle that at first it seemed like coincidence. The dog stopped barking at night for several days in a row. Muren's little son, who had been waking for months in tears and fever, slept until dawn with peaceful cheeks. Two brothers who had been feuding over a strip of land forgot to keep arguing and ended up sharing cider at the fair. Widow Brigid's hens, which had been skittish and disorderly, began laying again without scattering. Even the wind, so fond of slipping through cracks and rattling shutters, sometimes blew with an almost strange gentleness. "What a mild week," a man said in the tavern, as if commenting on the color of the clouds. "Don't speak of it too much," another replied. "Gentle weeks get offended and leave." Aithne heard this without raising her eyes from her bowl. She took no credit for anything. It seemed absurd to imagine her needle could influence the temper of animals, the dreams of children, or the patience of brothers, and yet each time she made the daily stitch, she felt that same invisible settling, a wrinkle in the world smoothing out, a loose thread returning to its place. She began paying attention to when she sewed. She tried making the stitch very early, before breakfast. The day seemed to open with clarity, like a curtain that runs properly on its rod. She tried doing it at noon, with pale sun slipping through the window. On those days, the afternoon moved more slowly, less harshly. Once, busy with too many orders and too many visitors, she left it until nearly evening and felt a new unease, a soft but persistent tightness in her chest that only dissolved when she finally made the stitch. After that, she never delayed it again, one stitch only for the calm of the world. There were days when the phrase seemed poetic and absurd, the sort of thing a tired bard might murmur through beer vapors. Other days it sounded so true she hardly dared think it in full. She repeated it silently while threading the needle, and something in the gesture took on the seriousness of a prayer without an altar. Meanwhile, the village continued with its life. Mid-month market came, and with it carts of honey, baskets of smoked fish, skeins of wool, tallow candles, knives, jars. The girls tried ribbons in bright colours. Children chased a loose wheel through the mud. A man played the flute by the well, and the melody rose and fell like a strand that could not quite be knotted. Aithne went to buy linen and ordinary needles, for the silver one she used only for that secret task. There she heard murmurs that made her pause. They've seen lights on the hill of narration. There have always been lights there. Not like this. This time they moved as if they were dancing. Then don't look. The hill's name stayed in her ears. Narration was an ancient mound covered in grass and low flowers, a long hour from the village along a path of hawthorn and ash. Children played far from it. Shepherds skirted its slope without setting foot on its crest. It was not forbidden by law, but by an agreement older than the written word. Better not to trouble things that remember too much. That night, while she combed her hair before the bowl of water she used as a mirror, Aithne wondered whether the shoes came from there. She found no answer, only the feeling that her life, once so neatly mended, was beginning to show a hidden seam. More mornings passed. The shoes kept coming. Aithne began storing them in an old cedar chest lined with clean cloths. She did not know why. Perhaps out of respect, perhaps because disposing of them seemed improper. Each pair rested wrapped separately as if they were sleeping creatures. Sometimes she opened the chest and looked at that small gathering of impossible colors. Reed green beneath rain, dove-wing gray, midnight blue over a lake, brown like a newly fallen acorn. Never did she find two alike. Never did she see any sign of wear. They seemed like shoes meant for silent dances in places where mud did not exist. One late spring afternoon, old Sorcha came to visit. Sorcha lived at the edge of the village near the willows. She knew how to cure colds with thyme steam, read changes in weather through her knees, and spoke little. But when she did, her words arrived with a soft weight, like smooth stones carried from the river. People went to her for tisanes, for advice, for superstition, or for habit. No one ever quite knew what trade her knowledge belonged to, a little to all of them. "I brought chamomile," she said upon entering, as if that were the reason for her visit. She sat by the fire, stroked the cat, looked around the room in a way that was not intrusive, but not innocent either. "Your house sounds different," she remarked. Aithne was darning a thick sock. She looked up. "Different for good or ill? Like a room where someone has just set down a full glass of water and has not yet left." The seamstress smiled, though a small tremor ran along the back of her neck. Sorcha accepted a cup of tea, drank, waited. At last, Aithne opened the chest and showed her the shoes. The old woman did not gasp. She did not cross herself. She did not pull her hand away. She took one pair, turned it toward the light, and held it for a moment in her palm. "Yes," she said, "work of the good neighbors. No one seriously calls them that. I do when I do not wish other names to hear me." Aithne sat facing her. "Why do they leave them for me?" Sorcha looked at the shoe as if listening to a story told by leather. "Perhaps because you sew well. There are other seamstresses. Perhaps because you sew without haste." Aithne waited. "Perhaps," Sorcha went on, "because you do not yank the thread in anger when it tangles. Some hands carry storms inside them. Yours, not so much." The answer was unsettling and somehow the most sensible one she had heard. "They also leave a phrase," Aithne admitted, "and a silver needle. I am meant to make one single stitch." Sorcha raised her head very slowly. "Every day?" "Every day." "And do you?" "Yes." The old woman set the shoe in her lap. Silence remained between them for a long while. The fire crackled. Outside, a hen complained over something trivial. "Then you have already accepted the pact," Sorcha said at last. Aithne felt her heart quicken a little. "I have promised nothing." "Sometimes doing is the oldest way of promising." The seamstress looked at the silver needle on the table. "Is it dangerous?" Sorcha folded her hands. "Everything that comes from the Sita asks for care. But not all of theirs is cruelty. They also love the fine order of certain things. Music well played, bread fairly divided. A garden tended with patience, a seam made without violence. There are old stories of tiny tasks that sustain whole seasons. Seasons? Or smaller things, or larger ones, one never knows." Aithne wanted to ask much more. What would happen if she stopped sewing? What the shoes meant? Why her? But the questions crowded together, and in the end she only said, "I do not feel trapped." Sorcha nodded. "That is a good sign too. And the bad one?" The old woman smiled faintly. "You would feel haste, or pride, or hunger to know too much too quickly." Then she left a little pouch of chamomile on the table and rose to go. Before leaving, she turned at the door. "When you receive a gift from the other side, never ask first what you gain. Ask what wishes to be cared for through you." That sentence stayed with Aithne for days. What wishes to be cared for through you? Each morning she took the new pair of shoes in her hands with greater attention. She no longer saw them only as mysterious gifts, but as signs of a silent conversation. Sometimes she imagined small, skillful hands sewing leather beneath a green light, or a chamber inside the hill with low tables, white wooden lasts, and songs in an ancient tongue. Then she chided herself. To imagine too much about the Sida, according to the old people, was one of the quickest ways to draw closer to them than was wise. But curiosity is a stubborn cloth. One night of slim moonlight, while the village slept and the sea was little more than a breath beyond the fog, Aithne heard something outside her house. Not a blow, not a footstep, a faint chime, as if a buckle had brushed stone. She lay still in bed. The cat lifted its head, ears rigid but did not hiss. That gave her courage. She wrapped herself in her shawl, crossed the cold floor barefoot, and drew the window curtain back only slightly. The world outside was blue and silver. The garden slept, the wall breathed moss, and on the threshold, though dawn was still far off, already rested the pair of shoes for the next morning. She saw no one, and yet beside the door, for the briefest instant, she thought she could make out a shadow more delicate than any human shadow. A tall, slender form, motionless as the trunk of a birch. Its edges were not entirely fixed. It seemed made of old clarity. Aithne blinked. The form was gone. Only the shoes and the moon remained. She did not open the door. She did not wish to break something she did not understand. She returned to bed with her heart both calm and wakeful, as though she had heard her own name spoken from very far away. The next morning, beneath the usual strip of linen, she found another embroidered line. While the needle sings, the coast will sleep in peace. She read it several times. Then she stored that piece of linen with the others in a box that had once held mother-of-pearl buttons and leftover ribbons. There were more than 20 by then. Some phrases repeated themselves. Others changed a little. All spoke of calm, of sleep, of stillness, of soothed water and days that did not fracture. That very day, the sea stayed astonishingly smooth well into the afternoon. The fishermen returned with nets full and not a single bitter story to tell. No one lost an oar, no one slipped on the stones of the pier. Even the gulls seemed to argue more quietly. Aithne began to understand that her stitch did not belong only to her house. Perhaps it belonged to the entire coast. Summer came slowly with the elegance of an expected guest who has no need to announce herself. The rains turned warmer. The sky remained clear longer each day, and the meadows behind the village took on a green so vivid it hurt a little to look at them in full sun. Bees worked with grave happiness among foxgloves. Children ran barefoot over the dry patches in the road, and the sea, though it still changed its moods as the sea must, seemed less fond of anger. By then, Aithne no longer doubted that the task entrusted to her reached further than any practical mind would have found reasonable. Reason, in fact, had taken a seat in the corner of her life like a prudent aunt who disapproves of something while still staying for supper. It still existed. It still gave its opinions, but it no longer ruled alone. Each morning after gathering the shoes, Aithne prepared the table with ritual care. First, she wiped the wood with a damp cloth and a few leaves of marjoram. Then she placed the silver needle beside the pincushion. She chose a thread according to whatever her hand felt was right. She did not know why. One day she took blue and another ochre, one day pearl gray and another pale green. She obeyed only a certainty that was very small and very firm. Then she waited a moment, sometimes with her eyes closed, sometimes listening to the kettle's soft simmer. And then she made the stitch. The piece that followed the gesture became more nuanced over time. She began to notice subtle differences in it, as someone learns to recognize kinds of rain by sound. Some stitches brought a cool calm, like clear water sliding between stones. Others left a warm stillness, like the weight of a blanket over the feet. Others seemed to clear something from the air, as if wiping dust from an invisible window. None felt exactly like the one before. She also understood that not just any fabric would do. The first time she discovered this was by accident. She had so much piled up work that, without thinking, she made the stitch in a rag meant for cleaning the oven. The moment the silver needle emerged, she felt a slight resistance, a false note. Not pain, not threat, but a kind of disagreement. The house did not settle, her chest did not loosen, the calm did not descend. She frowned, then took the edge of a child's shirt she was mending and made one single stitch there instead. This time, yes, serenity arrived with its familiar softness. It made her reflect. It was not only the mechanical act that mattered. The garment mattered, its destination, its purpose, the relationship between thread, cloth, and use. During the following weeks, she watched more carefully and came to a conclusion she could not have expressed in scholarly terms, but which to her was as clear as the feel of linen. The stitch had to fall upon something that was meant to care for someone. A sleeve, a collar, a blanket, a handkerchief, a seed pouch, an apron, a coif, a hem that sheltered against the wind. The calm of the world was not sewn into waste. It was sewn into things made to accompany life. That seemed beautiful to her, and grave. From then on, she chose with care where to place her one daily stitch. Sometimes she reserved it for the garment of a sick child. Sometimes for the shawl of an exhausted woman. Sometimes for the jacket of an old man who always came back from the fields with pain in his shoulders. She did not know whether those people received anything more than a well-set thread, but it comforted her to think so. One afternoon, a young shepherd named Fergal came to see her, with a coarse wool cloak torn by a branch. "I don't need it elegant," he said. "Only enough to keep the wind out." Aithne took the cloak and, without saying so, decided it would receive that day's stitch. The wool was rough, smelling of wind, sheep, and hillside. When the silver needle passed through the weave, the sensation was like fog slowly lifting from a valley. Fergal paid, thanked her, and left. 2 days later, he came back with a small cheese wrapped in leaves. "I owe you this," he said, setting it on the table. "You already paid for the sewing. I know, but since I started wearing the cloak again, I've slept better in the high hut. Before, every sound kept me awake. Now, I don't know. The wind sounds farther away." Aithne accepted the cheese with a smile that held more questions than certainty. Rumors began to travel by other paths. Nothing excessive, nothing that drew crowds, but in small villages where life repeats the same names and the same doors, every difference soon finds its murmur. People said Aithne's garments soothed, that babies wrapped in her blankets cried less, that widows breathed more deeply when they put on shawls from her workshop, that even the roughest men reluctantly took off their old clothes and asked her to reinforce collars and cuffs. Aithne refused to feed the talk. She went on working as before, charging fair prices, making no theatrical gestures. But she began noticing new looks, some grateful, some wary, some too curious. One of the wary looks belonged to Father Colum, the priest. He was not a bad man. He was rather a tired one, broad-browed and with eyes that had seen too much sorrow to be enthusiastic about the inexplicable. One morning he came to her door under the pretext of asking her to mend an alb. He entered, sat down, and observed the room. "They say your house has been especially blessed of late," he remarked. "People say many things," Aithne replied kindly. He set the white cloth on the table. "And what do you say?" She did not lie, but neither did she surrender everything. "I say that good sewing brings peace to the person who wears the garment. That should not surprise anyone." The priest studied her for a moment, perhaps weighing how much to press. In the end, he exhaled through his nose and nodded. "Careful hands are a form of charity." "I believe so. I also believe," he added, "that it is wise to distinguish between charity and enchantment." Aithne met his gaze without hardness. "If I discover the difference, I shall let you know." To her surprise, Father Colum smiled a little. It was the tired smile of someone who does not ignore the fact that the world has corners beyond his reach. Do that. It would give me rest. When he left, Aithne touched the alb with respect. She hesitated over whether or not to use that day's stitch on such cloth. In the end, she decided yes. The calm of the world could surely be sewn into a sacred garment as well. When the needle passed through it, she felt something unexpected. Not the serenity of a room or of sleep, but the stillness of a bell that at last stops trembling after ringing for a long time. It was a broader, higher peace, like the air above a freshly cut field. That week, Father Colum preached in such a gentle voice that several old women left church remarking that he finally seemed to be getting enough sleep. The shoes kept arriving, and with them, at times, new messages. For those who keep watch, for those who wait, for milk that rises without fear, for the oars that return, so the children do not inherit the harshness of their elders. Aithne kept them all. Sometimes at night by candlelight she reread them and felt that those brief phrases concealed an immense, delicate, ancient task. As if someone, somewhere beneath the hills or beyond the edge of the sea, were keeping account of the small tensions that split the world and were trying to remedy them through a collaboration that was tiny and constant. High summer brought a fair by the river. There were ribbons, music, honey stalls, modest contests of strength, and a circle of girls who danced until the dust rose around them. Aithne went in a simple dress and a light shawl. She carried a basket of small embroideries to sell. She was glad to see the village laughing with a rare abandon, as though some invisible burden had loosened. At sunset, while the sky turned the colour of peach and heather, a blind harpist began to play an old melody. It was not a tavern tune or a work song. It was something older, slower. Many fell silent when they heard it. Some, without thinking, made the gesture of touching wood or iron. Aithne felt her skin rise. The melody was familiar to her, not because she had heard it before, but because it resembled the silence that remained in the house after her daily stitch. It took her breath away. She looked around. People listened with a mixture of pleasure and caution. The willows bent over the river. The fair lights were beginning to glow, but among the crowd, across the circle, she saw a figure that did not fully belong to the human gathering. It was a tall woman, taller than any woman in the village, wrapped in a grey-green mantle that looked woven from mist. Her hair fell very long, pale as oats under moonlight. She wore no visible jewelry. She needed none. She stood perfectly still, her hands hidden in the folds of her cloak, looking directly at Aithne. There was no hostility in her face, no smile either, only an attention so calm it was difficult to hold for long. Aithne blinked. Someone passed between them carrying a jug. When her view cleared, the woman was gone. The music continued for a while. Then the fair resumed. The children asked for sweets. The men spoke of harvests. A girl lost a ribbon. A dog stole a piece of cake. Everything was ordinary, and yet for Aithne the world had shifted a little. That night she did not sleep at once. Sitting beside the window, listening to the dark sea, she understood two things. First, she was not alone in the task. Second, sooner or later calm would ask for something more than blind obedience. Toward the end of August, the air began to carry a faint forewarning of autumn. It was not yet visible in the trees, but it was there in certain silences, in the way the light abandoned the corners of the garden earlier, in the smell of the mornings, now edged with ripe apple and damp earth. Aithne, who knew well the calendar of fabrics and seasons, began taking heavier cloths out of the chests and accepting commissions for cloaks and linings. The shoes did not fail a single morning. Sometimes it seemed to her that the rhythm of the whole world depended upon that invisible faithfulness. She woke before dawn with the certainty that on the other side of the door a new pair would be waiting, as though the night itself laid down its offering before withdrawing. She gathered them with a silent gratitude that no longer had anything of surprise in it and much of alliance. The cedar chest was nearly full. One rainy afternoon, while everyone stayed indoors, Aithne opened it to air the cloths and looked over the whole collection. Nearly 60 pairs. Perhaps more. She wondered, as she had before, why shoes in particular. Not cloaks, not gloves, not combs. Shoes. She held one pair for a while on her lap, blue-grey leather with a tiny herringbone seam. In the end, it made sense, she thought. Shoes know passage. They touch the earth. They accompany the step from one place to another. They carry and return. They keep balance. They protect the body in its journey. Perhaps the Sida, or whoever her silent visitors were, paid her in roads. Not in riches, not in gold, in roads. The thought moved her strangely. She, who had traveled little, began to understand that even a still life needs good shoes to cross the invisible. Winters, griefs, doubts, the hollow hours of evening, the fear that settles without warning. We all walk even when we hardly leave the house. It was around then that difficulty appeared. Until then, the calm brought by the stitch had almost always been docile, benevolent, a presence that settled like soft mist over village and coast. But one morning, as she made her single stitch in a baby blanket, Aithne felt a very different resistance. Not the disagreement of cloth, as with the oven rag, something broader, like a cord drawn taut in the distance, like a restless animal on the other side of a hedge. The peace came, yes, but it had to force its way through. That same afternoon, the sky changed. A thick cloud gathered over the west, low and of a dark color that did not promise ordinary rain. The wind began to turn sharply between the houses. Dogs barked toward the hill. The hens settled early. On the pier, men tied their boats twice over without knowing quite why. Aithne watched it all from her doorway, the folded blanket still in her arm. The sea was breathing badly. No great waves rose at once, but there was on the surface a stubborn trembling, an iron impatience under the water. Before night had fully fallen, Sorsha arrived, wrapped in her dark shawl and leaning on a hazel stick. "Bar the house well tonight," she said without preamble. "I was going to." The old woman looked at her closely. "Did you feel resistance?" Aithne nodded. For the first time, Sorsha let out a small sound, part assent, part concern. There are nights when the other side stirs more strongly, seasonal turnings, old reckonings, doors left slightly open. And my stitch is not enough? Sometimes it is enough to remind calm of the way, not always enough to command it. The answer was not comforting, but it was honest. That night the village slept badly. There was no savage storm, not the kind of fury that splits trees or tears away roofs. In a sense, it was worse for being subtler. A state of unease that slipped into everything. Shutters struck though they were well fastened. Children twisted in their sleep. Cows lowed for no reason. Water in the buckets trembled with a faint murmur. Even Aithne's cat refused its chair and hid beneath the bed. She could not sleep. She sat by the almost spent fire, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the creaks of the house and the rough breathing of the sea. Near midnight, she thought she heard, mixed with the wind, a very distant music. Not the harpist's melody from the fair, something deeper, older. It came and went as though the hill of Knocknarea were breathing. Before dawn, while darkness had turned a dense blue, someone knocked at her door. Not with knuckles, with 3 light, exact taps on the wood. Aithne rose. She did not feel fear in the ordinary sense. She felt something else, the certainty that whatever choice she made next, her life would be stitched differently from then on. She opened the door. Standing on the threshold was the woman from the fair. At that hour and from that distance, it was even harder to think of her as human. Not because she was monstrous or extravagant. Quite the opposite. Her face was beautiful with an almost painful clarity, like certain winter mornings when the air seems made of thin crystal. Her eyes were a colour Aithne could not name, now river grey, now wet leaf green. Her hair fell in a long braid, interwoven with pale strands, perhaps silver, perhaps light. She wore the same mist-like mantle. In one hand she held a small case of white wood. "Aithne, daughter of Mael," she said in a voice so serene it seemed to come not from her throat but from the air itself. "The coast requires one more stitch." The seamstress pressed her fingers against the wood of the door to steady her pulse. "You asked for one only each day, and one each day you have given faithfully. Then why is it not enough?" The woman inclined her head slightly as one listening to a just question. "Because there are nights when the unease of the world grows faster than its comfort." It was not a full answer, but Aithne understood no clearer one would come. "Who are you?" she asked. "In the halls beneath the hill they call me Aubean." The name fell in the doorway like a clear drop into a deep well. Aithne opened the door a little wider. "I cannot give more than was asked without knowing what I am holding up." Aubean looked at her with an attention that held not the slightest shadow of offense. "You hold rest. You hold shores that do not wish to devour each other. You hold the sleep of those who do not yet know how to defend it. You hold the small agreement between milk that boils and the hand that lifts the pot in time, between the bitter word and the tongue that chooses to keep it, between the wave and the boat, between morning and dawn. That is what you hold." Aithne lowered her eyes for a moment. The simplicity with which it was said gave her more vertigo than any threat could have done. "Why me?" "Because you hear seams before you see them." Wind passed between them, making the edge of the fairy mantle quiver and the candle flame behind Aithne shudder. "And what if I refuse?" Aubean did not smile, but something like compassion appeared in her face. "Nothing would fall upon you as punishment. We do not work with you that way. But the place where your stitch could rest tonight would remain unpatched. And there are small things that, when they are not mended, learn to break in larger ways." The seamstress felt a tiredness that was both deep and gentle. It was an impossible conversation, and yet everything in it sounded clearer than most things said at noon in full daylight. "How many stitches?" "One more tonight." Aubean raised the case and opened it. Inside lay a thread wound upon itself, so fine it seemed like water made solid. It was not white, it was not silver, it was the colour of calm before it touches the earth. "This is not for just any cloth," said the woman of the Sida. "For what cloth then?" "For the garment you wear when you hear your house breathe." Aithne understood at once. Her own grey shawl, old and soft from long use, the one she wore on cold dawns and during nights of work, the one she had worn when her mother died, the one that knew her shoulders better than any other cloth. "And where must I sew it?" Aubean lifted her gaze toward the darkness where the sea was waiting. "Where the wool brushes the heart." With that she stepped back. "At dawn I will find the shoes as always," Aithne murmured, more to herself than to her visitor. "Well, the needle sings," Aubean replied. The figure withdrew without sound. The mist of early morning seemed to receive her and dissolve her. Aithne closed the door, leaned her back against it, and stood motionless for several heartbeats. Then she took up her shawl, spread it upon the table, lit another candle. The silver needle waited, as it did every day, beside the pincushion. She threaded the impossible thread through it. Her hand did not tremble. She found the place where, when worn, the wool rested over her chest. There, with reverent slowness, she made a single stitch. The instant she drew the thread through, the whole house exhaled. Not figuratively, it exhaled. The beams released the taut creaking that had held them rigid all night. The fire settled itself. The cat came out from under the bed and leaped onto the chair as if a bell only it could hear had rung. Outside, the wind lessened by a degree. It did not cease, but it changed its intent, and Aithne felt something else. Not only calm descending upon the village, but the answering flicker of countless small pieces lighting at once, like candles in scattered houses. A child turning over and sleeping on, a woman unclenching her jaw, an oar not slipping from a hand, an old man letting go of a name he had held for years, all of it tiny, all of it real. She remained seated until dawn with the shawl around her shoulders. When at last she opened the door, the sky was clear, and on the threshold lay a pair of soft grey leather shoes, simple and perfect, more like the shoes of an ordinary villager than any she had received before. Inside, embroidered in almost invisible thread, gleamed 3 small sheaves of grain. Beneath them there was no written phrase, only a rowan leaf. After that night, the bond between the seamstress and the good neighbours ceased to feel like a mere exchange wrapped in mystery, and came to feel more like a silent conversation, ever more precise. Not because the visits became frequent or because Albion returned at once. On the contrary, the woman of the Sida did not appear again for many weeks, but the world around Aithne began to answer her gestures with greater clarity. When she chose the day's garment carefully, the sense of agreement was immediate, almost musical. When her mind was distracted or her heart clouded by small irritations, the silver needle seemed heavier. It did not refuse, it simply waited. And Aithne had learned by then that the best stitches are made only after hand and breath have made peace with each other. That did not mean she became a saint or a wise woman. She still grew tired. She still lost patience when thread tangled 3 times in a row, or when customers promised to come Tuesday and appeared Saturday with the same urgency. She still felt, from time to time, sharp little pangs of loneliness when she saw lights glowing in other windows at supper. But now she understood more clearly that the calm of the world was not a blanket thrown over everything at once. It was mending work, a succession of small acts done in time. Autumn settled in. Leaves began dropping from the ash trees and spinning through the yard like worn coins. Peat smoke became a more constant presence over the roofs. The days shrank. The sea took on the color of tin, and Aithne sewed more than ever. There were cloaks to line, blankets to reinforce, ill-fitting gloves, skirts needing new hems, children's clothes handed down and altered for younger siblings. Sometimes she worked from first light until deep into the evening, with a low lamp and the cat asleep near the brazier. Yet no matter how much work there was, she never forgot the daily stitch. The village, without fully knowing it, settled into a discreet well-being. Sorrows did not disappear. There was fever on an outlying farm. A fisherman injured his wrist. Rain spoiled part of a barley crop. Life remained life, but even misfortune seemed to find better edges to rest against without utterly undoing those who suffered them. There was more help among neighbours, fewer cutting words in the markets, fewer broken dreams in the middle of the night. One afternoon, Muireann the baker arrived with a tired face and a basket covered by a cloth. "I'm not here for bread," Aithne said, making a foolish little joke simply to be kind. Muireann barely smiled. "My mother is dying." She did not say it dramatically. She said it with the worn resignation of someone who has already done enough weeping in back rooms. Aithne asked her in. Muireann's mother was a very old, bony woman with a difficult temper who had outlived nearly everyone her age and had been fading by degrees for months. Muireann, sturdy in all other matters, trembled when it came to leave-taking. "I have nothing to mend," she admitted. I thought perhaps you might sew her something. A handkerchief, a pillow cover, or anything. Something soft." Aithne understood. She took out a good piece of linen, washed in lavender water and dried in clean wind. She cut it without haste, folded it, listened while Mirren spoke of her mother, of her habits, of how she still complained about the salt even though she barely tasted the soup, of how she called her by the name of a sister dead 50 years. Aithne listened and worked. And when the moment came, she knew the day's stitch belonged there, on the handkerchief's edge. One single gesture, barely visible. The feeling that followed was one of such quiet tenderness that Aithne's eyes blurred. Muireann took the handkerchief that same night. The next day she returned with her shoulders bowed, but peaceful. "She died in her sleep," she said. She was holding the cloth in her hand, as if she were gripping the corner of something familiar. She asked no more questions, sought no explanations. She only pressed Aithne's hands between her own, still warm from the oven, and left. That day, for the first time, Aithne cried after making the stitch. She cried without anguish. She cried for the beautiful and sorrowful weight of helping things almost no one saw. For understanding that calm does not always prevent pain, but it gives it a less harsh place to rest. With Samhain approaching, the village grew more attentive to the unseen. Protective branches were hung on some doors. Small dishes of milk were left beside certain ancient walls out of respect, or habit, or both. Children were warned not to stray at dusk. The air itself seemed to grow finer, as if the cloth between this world and the other had become thinner. Aithne noticed that the shoes of those days were especially beautiful. One pair came the color of dry leaves threaded in the shade of old bronze. Another was the blue-black of starlings at dusk. Another, a pale cream like woodland mushrooms under moonlight. Each pair seemed made not only with mastery, but with memory, as though an entire year of seasons had been gathered into the leather. On Samhain Eve, beneath that morning's pair, she found a strip of linen unlike any before it. It was longer, softer, and embroidered with a new phrase. "Tonight you do not sew for the village, you sew for the door." Aithne read the words several times. The silver needle on the table reflected a cold glint. She remembered the night of the restrained storm. She remembered Aoi Bian standing in the doorway. She also remembered the old tales, the ones that spoke of thresholds protected by salt, iron, fire, or song. But she had never heard of a door being guarded by stitching. She passed the day among smaller commissions and long thoughts. At dusk, she lit candles in the window, as so many other houses in the village did. Prepared a simple supper and left most of it untouched. Waited. At midnight, when the wind smelled of smoke, wet leaves, and cut apple, the same exact knocking sounded again at the door. 3 light-measured taps. She opened it. Aoi Bian was there again. This time she was not alone. Beside her stood 2 other figures, smaller and harder to look at directly, as if the eye slipped a little when trying to hold them in focus. They wore dark cloaks with pale edges. They did not seem threatening. Rather, they looked like attentive attendants to an ancient ceremony. Between the 3 of them, they held an empty frame, narrow and tall, made of bleached branches interwoven with dried herbs. "The door," said Aoi Bian, "needs to be reminded." "Reminded of what?" asked Aithne. "That its purpose is to let things pass with measure." The sentence was as clear as it was mysterious. "What must I sew?" Aoi Bian held out her hands. Resting on them was a ribbon of very fine wool, dyed a deep red. Not aggressive, but warm, like banked embers. "This will go along the inner edge of your threshold," she explained. "Not to close it, but to teach the passage good manners." Aithne looked at the ribbon, then at her own old blue door. "Who wants to come in?" "Everything wishes to come in," Aoi Bian answered with a softness that excluded neither creature, sorrow, nor memory. but not everything should do so, all at once. That seemed to Aithne the most precise definition of disorder she had ever heard. They worked together in silence. Aithne knelt on the inside floor, where wood met stone. She laid the red ribbon along the lower edge of the frame. First she fastened it with her ordinary needle, just to set it in place. Then she took the silver one. Oibian held a candle whose flame did not stir in the wind. The other two figures remained still behind her. One single stitch. That was what was asked. Aithne placed it in the exact center of the threshold, where the dawn shoes had so often rested. When she pulled the thread through, she did not feel the usual calm. She felt something larger, the settling of a rightful boundary. Not a hostile barrier, not a wall, rather the clear outline of a hospitable limit, like the line that separates sleep from waking without setting them at odds, or the shore between sea and land, allowing each to touch the other without wholly losing itself. The whole door seemed to remember its purpose. Oibian lowered the candle. "Well sewn," she said. Aithne rose slowly. Her knees were cold and her chest very still. "Will this protect the house?" "It protects the way the house receives and releases. That is enough for many things." The seamstress wanted to ask more, but she sensed the night already closing itself around those presences with the same delicacy with which an eyelid covers a tired eye. "Will I see you again?" she asked at last. Oibian looked at her with an almost human light in her face. "Each morning you let in what we bring you. That is already a way of seeing." The three figures moved off into the mist. They did not exactly walk, nor did they vanish all at once. It was more as if the darkness recognized them and made room. Aithne closed the door, touched the barely visible red ribbon along the inner edge with her fingertips. Then she sat by the fire, drew the shawl over her shoulders, and smiled without quite knowing why. The next morning, for the first time since the beginning, there were no shoes on the threshold. But inside the house, beside the window, a new pair was waiting. Winter arrived without drama, the way inevitable things do when they know no one can stop them. One morning the garden woke under a thin white film. Another morning the water in the bucket showed a hardened surface. Then frost began drawing tiny ferns at the edges of the glass, and the roads grew slower, more thoughtful beneath boots. The shoes continued appearing inside the house, always near the window, as if the threshold, after its Samhain stitch, had learned new ways of receiving. Aithne accepted that change with the naturalness she had by then developed for wonder, when wonder arrives with good manners. Every dawn brought a new pair and a new phrase, though the messages were now fewer and shorter, almost whispers. For the smoke that returns to the roof, for cracked hands, for those who keep the fire, so winter does not speak too loudly. Those words accompanied her through the short days and long nights. The village folded inward upon itself. There was more soup than conversation, more quick steps between doors, more silence of loom and brazier. Aithne worked with thick wool, dense cloth, patched leather and bed linens, and she continued making her daily stitch. Now she did so with a different awareness. She no longer saw herself as the passive recipient of a kindly mystery, but as the guardian of a small hinge between worlds. She did not know much. In truth, she still knew almost nothing about the real scope of her task. But she had learned enough to respect it, and enough to love it. One afternoon in January, while the sky was a mirror of lead, and the light could not seem to decide between day and night, Domhnall, the old man who months earlier had warned her against the gifts of the hills, knocked on her door. He was more bent than he had been in autumn. His beard was thinner. His eyes, however, still held that brightness of someone who has crossed much time and kept the useful parts of it. "Do they still come?" he asked as soon as he sat down. Aithne did not pretend not to understand. "They do." He nodded slowly. "Good." The sincerity of that good made her smile. "Weren't you going to tell me to throw them into the sea?" "Months ago, yes. Today, no. Domhnall stretched his hands toward the fire. I have lived long enough to learn that not every pact with the other side is a trap. Some are trades, heavy ones, silent ones, but trades all the same. Aithne set aside the shirt she had been mending. Did you know of anyone else? The old man took a moment to answer. My great-aunt used to say that in her youth there was a man who rang the harbour bell on foggy mornings. No one asked him to. No one paid him much, but while he lived, few boats were lost. When he died, the fog seemed more crooked for years. Perhaps it was only good habit. Perhaps not. In these lands, one never quite knows where habit ends and the unseen world begins. Aithne thought of her needle. Sometimes I fear that if I fail one day, everything will unravel. Domhnall looked at her with grave gentleness. Nothing important ever depends entirely on one hand alone. But there are hands whose absence leaves a gap that takes time to be filled. Take care of yours, that is all. That sentence stayed with her for weeks. Take care of yours. She had not thought about that enough. Yes, she made the stitch daily, but she did not always rest well. She did not always eat at decent hours. Sometimes she sewed with her back too stiff or her eyes too tired from poor light. From then on, she treated her craft with a more disciplined tenderness. She took pauses, warmed her fingers better over steam, put an old cushion on her chair so she would not end the day utterly spent, rubbed her hands with wax and herb salve when the skin cracked, and she noticed that the silver needle answered that care with a new lightness. At the end of January there came a brief snowfall, unusual on that coast. It was not heavy, but enough to hush the village for several hours. The roofs woke with white edges. The walls looked older. Seen from the rise, the sea had the still tin color of metal under flour. Aithne opened the door and saw the new pair of shoes resting near the window, reflected in the glass by the white light outside. They were an almost impossible pale blue. She took them into her hands. The leather was cold, but not icy. At the heel were embroidered little lines that looked like gentle waves. Beneath them she found a phrase unlike any that had come before. Soon another hand must learn. She read it once, twice, 3 times. Her heart turned over in a calm way, the way it does when a dearly loved fabric begins to grow thin with use, and you know it will soon need careful mending, or someone else must be taught how to care for it. Another hand? The idea had been floating there for some time, perhaps, but it had never taken the shape of words. Aithne was not old, nor young. Her eyesight was still good, her hand still steady, and her strength sufficient. But no craft meant to endure can rest forever in one person alone. She spent the day thoughtful. There were not many young women in the village with patience for fine sewing. Some knew how to mend their own things, of course, or to stitch blankets and sacks in broad, sturdy fashion. But what the silver needle required was not only skill, it was a kind of attention, a disposition of spirit, a listening. Toward evening, one face came to mind. Nessa, the blacksmith's younger daughter. Nessa was 14 and had unexpectedly delicate hands for someone raised among sparks, hammers, and iron. Sometimes she came to deliver her father's commissions or collect shirts, or while she waited, she watched Aithne work with a stillness uncommon at her age. She did not talk much, but when she did, her questions were precise. Why one stitch held better than another, how one knows whether a fabric needs support or drape, why certain threads sound different when pulled tight. More than once, Aithne had thought the girl could hear sewing with her fingers. 3 days later, Nessa arrived with a leather jerkin to be taken in. Her cheeks were red from the cold and her dark hair was gathered up carelessly. "Your father always cuts large," said Aithne. "He says people grow more easily than they shrink." "There is some logic in that. Nessa stood looking at the table, the threads, the ordinary needle Ethna was using. Then she raised her eyes. Is it true what they say? That depends on what they say. That your seams bring calm. Ethna went on working for a moment before answering. Things done well usually do. Nessa accepted the answer without complaint. Ethna liked that. If you wish, the seamstress said after a while, you may come some afternoons and learn. The girl's eyes widened, but she did not answer with noisy excitement. She answered with something better, a tension full of responsibility. Truly, we will begin with straight hems. There is no hurry. That was how the teaching began. Nessa came after helping at the forge and before supper. She sat by the window and obeyed with humble diligence. At first she threaded badly, pulled too tight, pricked her finger. Then she acquired steadiness. She did not shine for speed, but for a natural patience Ethna recognized at once as a precious rarity. The girl did not fight the cloth. She listened to what the cloth was asking. For weeks Ethna said nothing of the silver needle or the shoes of the Sida. She taught only the visible craft, kinds of stitch, ways of finishing, tricks for distributing tension, methods of mending without leaving a coarse scar. But every afternoon she watched Nessa with growing certainty. One night after, making the daily stitch along the edge of a wool cap meant for a newborn child the calm that followed spread in a new way. Not only outward, but slightly to one side, as if it were seeking someone else in the room. Nessa was putting away the scissors and lifted her head as though she had heard a very distant melody. Did you feel that? She asked before she could stop herself. Ethna looked at her. What did you feel? The girl frowned, searching for words. Like when snow stops falling and everything seems to keep listening, but inside the house. Ethna knew then that the linen's message had not been a warning for some remote future. It had already begun. In February, when the first milder rains hinted that soft ground would soon return, she decided to show Nessa the cedar chest. Nessa looked at the shoes in a long silence. She touched none of them until Ethna nodded. Then she took up a moss-colored pair and held it reverently. They're from the Sida, she whispered. It was not a question. Yes. Nessa did not step back. She did not laugh, nor did she cross herself. She only drew a deep breath. Ethna told her what was necessary. Not everything. Not the most intimate details of the night she stitched her own shawl. But enough. The daily arrival, the silver needle, the phrase, the task of one single stitch for the calm of the world. The girl listened with the same recollected attention with which others listen to the names of the dead or to an ancient prayer. And me? She asked at the end. You were still learning how to hold a hem without growing angry at it. Nessa smiled. That is true. But perhaps one day the needle will wish to know you. From then on, the girl came with a sweet seriousness, without losing the lightness of her age. Sometimes, while they worked, Ethna thought that perhaps this was the true payment of the shoes and the years. Not only the calm poured out over village and coast, but continuity, the possibility that the craft would not die at a single table. At the beginning of March, when the earth was already beginning to smell of waking and the evenings stretched just a little longer, the dawn shoes were green as tender as newly opened hawthorn leaves. Beneath them waited a final phrase, embroidered with startling clarity. Well-sown calm always finds its heirs. Ethna smiled with her whole face. That night she left the silver needle on the table, between her hand and Nessa's, as they both put the threads in order at the end of the day. She said nothing. It was not necessary. The candle flame trembled only slightly. Outside, the sea breathed quietly, and for the first time since the beginning of the story, Ethna felt that the world was asking not only for her faithfulness, It was also offering her rest. On the first morning of spring, she opened the door and found a simple pair of shoes made of light hazel leather, with firm, beautiful seams. They were larger than the others had been. Not large enough for a man, but not as small as the dancing sidhe of her imaginings. They were the size of a girl still growing. She carried them inside and called for Nessa, who had arrived early, her cheeks pink from the air. "Look," Aithna said. The young girl stared at the pair, bewildered. "They can't be." Aithna nodded. There was no strip of linen beneath them, no phrase, no rowan leaf, only a spool of blue-grey thread. Nessa lifted the shoes in both hands as if holding a sleeping animal. Her eyes shone, but she did not cry. She smiled in a slow, deep, peaceful way. And Aithna recognized in it the same calm she herself had felt the first time the silver needle obeyed her hand. Outside, in the Greystone village, the chimneys were beginning to smoke. Someone opened the window. A rooster remembered his duty late. The waves came and withdrew modestly. A child laughed in a neighboring house. A woman set milk to boil. A man untangled a net without cursing. And that day and so many more to come, let itself be mended by the patient tenderness of hands that know how to listen before they pull tight. Aithna went on sewing for many years. She did not stop receiving shoes at once. For a long time they continued to appear, some for her, some for Nessa, some perhaps for both, if the Sidhe understand such distinctions the same way we do. The silver needle passed from one hand to the other on certain occasions and returned again, as tools do when they serve something larger than a single life. There were harsher winters and more generous summers. There were burials, births, weddings, lesser storms, good harvests, weary days, evenings of soup and wool. The calm of the world did not become permanent or absolute because it never does. But in that house beyond the blue door and the low window, it found a place where it was cared for daily. And that was enough for much. In time, the people of the village stopped speaking of strange gifts and preferred to say simply that in Aithna's house, sewing was done in a way that helped the heart. The old people nodded. Children grew up wearing garments that had been mended there. Women remembered being soothed by blankets that had once lain on that table. Men left their jackets there and took them back with less weight in their backs, asking no questions. And when Aithna grew old enough to spend more time by the fire than by the window, Nessa sat in the chair with that same mixture of attention and calm. Sometimes, on very clear mornings when the mist withdrew from the coast like a curtain neatly unstitched, Aithna opened the cedar chest and looked at the long row of shoes wrapped in clean cloths. Then she would think that each pair was a form of gratitude, a footprint offered by those who rarely step fully onto our side, not an exact payment, not a treasure to sell or display, but a reminder that even between different worlds there can be courtesy, care, and shared labor. On one of those mornings, her hair already completely white and her hands thinned by time, she thought she saw in the distance, near the moss-covered wall, a tall figure wrapped in grey-green. It did not move. It only watched the house with the patience of someone visiting something beloved. Aithna raised her hand in a quiet greeting. The figure inclined its head. Then the mist took it back. Aithna closed the chest, sat down, listened to Nessa working near the window. Thread brushed against cloth with a soft sound, almost like fine rain. A pot simmered over the fire. Outside, the sea kept breathing, and somewhere, perhaps beneath the hill, perhaps among ancient roots or in halls where music never grows old, someone knew that the stitch had been given once more. One single stitch for the calm of the world